Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're gonna crack open a book called The Y-Axis: Hidden Motives and the Undiscovered Economics of Everyday Life.
Oh, very good.
So have you ever been just kind of perplexed about why some solutions just backfire in the real world?
Yeah, like totally.
Well, this book by Gneezy and John List dives headfirst into these situations.
What's really fascinating about these two authors is that they're both economics professors,
Yeah.
but instead of getting lost in all that theoretical stuff,
Right.
they take to the streets and set up these real-world experiments
Yeah.
to see how people actually behave in their natural settings.
Yeah,
That talk about bringing economics down to earth.
And I think one of the biggest takeaways from the book that they really drive home is this idea that sometimes the most logical, well-intentioned solutions can actually make problems worse.
Yeah.
And they call this the hidden motives problem.
Yes.
So one of the studies they talk about in the book is this daycare study, which I thought was so fascinating. They were trying to reduce late pickups, which I'm sure any parent can relate to, that's a common problem.
Oh, yeah.
But their solution kind of just created a whole new mess.
That's right. They decided to implement a fine for late pickups,
Right.
figuring that parents would be more on time to avoid that extra cost.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Makes sense, right. But here's where it gets really interesting. Instead of decreasing, late pickups actually increased after the fine was introduced.
So wait, more late pickups after you add a fine?
Right.
How does that even make sense?
Yeah.
What's the logic there?
Well, so they explain in the book that the fine accidentally changed the entire dynamic.
Right.
Before, parents felt guilty for being late
Uh-huh.
because it was inconveniencing the teachers,
Mm-hmm.
right? They were breaking that unspoken social contract.
Totally.
But by putting a price on being late, it became just another transaction,
Oh.
removing the guilt.
Oh, so it's you're paying for it now. It's like I'm booking a longer time.
Exactly. It shifted the meaning of the action.
Mm.
And this wasn't just a fluke. It's full of examples where incentives, even well-intentioned ones, totally backfired in surprising ways.
And it's funny because it's you think oh, I'll just, offer a small bonus for students fundraising for charity.
Right.
You would think that any bonus, no matter how small, would boost motivation.
It seems logical.
Right.
Right.
But in reality, the students who were offered the bonus actually ended up raising less money than those who weren't offered anything.
That's right.
It's so crazy.
Yeah, so how do you explain that?
Yeah.
Well, the authors suggest that the bonus actually undermined the students' intrinsic motivation to help.
Interesting.
So before the bonus, they were driven by this altruism, this pure, desire to make a difference.
Right, right.
But when money enters the equation, it shifted the focus from doing good to personal gain.
So I wonder if there's been times in my own life when I've inadvertently demotivated people by adding the wrong kind of incentive.
Right.
It makes you think.
It really underscores the importance of understanding the why behind people's actions.
Totally.
It's not always as straightforward as we might think.
And speaking of hidden motives, the book also dives into a topic that can be kind of controversial, gender dynamics in the workplace.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, the persistent wage gap and lack of women in leadership positions.
Right.
And they don't shy away from those really tough questions. Remember those controversial comments that were made by former Harvard president Larry Summers?
Yeah.
He suggested that maybe, just maybe, innate differences in aptitude between men and women might contribute to the gap.
Yeah, that started a lot of conversations.
They did.
So did the book just take the easy way out?
No, they didn't settle for easy answers.
Okay, yeah.
Or fall into the trap of stereotypes.
Okay.
They used more field experiments to dig into why women might be less likely to want to embrace that cutthroat competition. One that I thought was so interesting was the one they did on Craigslist.
Oh, yeah.
They posted 2 nearly identical job ads, one framed around sports and the other around community news.
Okay.
But they offered 2 different pay structures,
Okay.
a flat hourly rate or a performance-based bonus, where you could earn more if you outperformed your peers.
Makes sense.
But the results were pretty striking.
Well, what happened?
Women were significantly less likely to apply for the job with the performance-based bonus, even though it had the potential for higher earnings.
So it wasn't about the money itself,
Right.
but the way it was structured.
Totally.
Right.
So interesting. So do they offer any insight into why this might be?
Well, they found that women were more likely to choose collaboration over competition,
Interesting.
even if it meant potentially earning less.
Hmm.
So this begs the question, is this a natural inherent trait in women? Or is it a result of societal expectations and conditioning?
Well, to explore that, they took their research global, comparing cultures like the patriarchal Maasai in Tanzania to the matriarchal Khasi in India.
Okay, cool.
I'm really interested to find out what they discovered there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We'll dig into those cultural comparisons right after this.
So they went to Tanzania to study the Maasai, a traditionally patriarchal society. What did they find there?
Well, they had the Maasai play this game where they tossed tennis balls into these buckets.
Okay.
And when they offered like a flat rate for each successful toss, both men and women performed pretty much the same.
Okay.
But then they introduced a competitive element.
Okay.
Where participants could earn more by outperforming each other.
Okay.
And things got really interesting.
So I'm guessing the men jumped at the chance to compete?
You bet. Especially the younger men.
Right.
They were all about that high-stakes game.
Right.
The women, on the other hand, mostly stuck with that flat rate.
Right.
Even though it meant potentially earning less.
So at first glance, it seems like this supports the idea that women are inherently less competitive. But then they went to India to study the Khasi,
right,
a matriarchal society where women hold the economic power.
Exactly.
So I'm guessing that flipped the script a little bit.
It did. The Khasi women were actually more likely than the men to choose the competitive option in the ball tossing game.
Really?
They were even more competitive than the Maasai men.
That's a complete 180.
I know, right?
So it seems like culture really does play a huge role in shaping our attitudes towards competition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
These findings really suggest that our comfort level with competition, our willingness to go head-to-head for a bigger reward, is significantly influenced by the social norms and expectations we're raised with.
Right.
You know, it makes you wonder how much of our own behavior is shaped by the messages we've received throughout our lives.
I know. Have you ever felt pressure to, like, downplay your competitive spirit? Or maybe felt like you had to work twice as hard to prove yourself in a male-dominated field?
Yeah.
It's like something we all need to think about.
It is. It highlights the need for, creating workplaces and systems that encourage that healthy competition.
You're right.
Without disadvantaging anyone based on their gender or background.
Right. We need a level playing field.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've unpacked daycare debacles.
Yes.
We've seen how incentives can backfire and even explore gender dynamics through this cross-cultural lens.
Yeah.
But what about something a little more heartwarming?
Perfect.
The y-axis also dives into the world of charitable giving.
Oh, yeah.
And they uncover some really counterintuitive findings there, too.
They do one study focused on direct mail fundraising campaigns.
Okay.
And they found that giving people an easy way to opt out of future mailings actually increased donations.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Why would giving people an easy out make them more likely to donate?
I know it seems counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but it actually plays into our desire for autonomy and control.
Oh,
So when people feel pressured or obligated to give, they're more likely to resist. But by giving them a clear choice, a way to say no, it paradoxically makes them more likely to say yes in the first place.
So it's like that reverse psychology thing.
Kind of.
By giving people a sense of control, they're less likely to feel manipulated.
Right.
And actually more open to giving.
Exactly. It's all about how the choice is framed.
And speaking of framing, they also found that combining pay-what-you-want pricing with donations can be a really effective strategy.
It can.
Like those cafes where you can pay whatever you feel like for your coffee, and they donate a portion of the proceeds to charity.
Precisely. It taps into our desire to feel good about ourselves. To feel like we're getting a good deal and doing something good for the world.
So now I'm wondering, what are some of those unspoken incentives that drive my own decisions?
Yeah.
It's fascinating to think about the hidden forces that influence our actions. And the y-axis really pulls back the curtain on all of that.
It does. And speaking of hidden forces, the book also tackles a really important and very real-world problem: high school dropout rates, particularly in disadvantaged communities.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It's a complex issue, but they found some really promising solutions.
I'm all ears. What did they discover?
Well, they conducted this large-scale experiment in Chicago Heights, testing different types of incentives to see what would actually move the needle on student performance and engagement.
So did they just throw money at the problem?
You're right. It wasn't just about cash rewards.
Okay.
They experimented with a variety of incentives, both monetary and non-monetary.
Okay.
Some students received cash for good grades. Others were given the opportunity to earn points towards prizes they really wanted, while others were given personalized encouragement and mentoring.
So did they find a magic bullet?
Well, there's no single solution that works for everyone.
Right.
But what they discovered was incredibly encouraging. They found that targeted incentives, carefully tailored to the individual student's needs and motivations, could make a significant difference in their academic outcomes.
So it's about finding the right why for each individual student.
Exactly.
It's not just about dangling a carrot in front of them. It's about understanding what truly motivates them to succeed.
It's about tapping into their intrinsic drive, their desire to learn and grow.
This is really making me think about how we approach motivation in all areas of life, not just in education. Are we using the right incentives? Are we considering the hidden motives that might be driving behavior?
Right.
The y-axis really challenges us to rethink our assumptions.
It does, and it underscores the importance of approaching problems with a beginner's mind, with a willingness to experiment, and to let go of our preconceived notions.
Speaking of letting go of preconceived notions, the book also delves into a topic that's often shrouded in myth and misunderstanding. The complexities of human health and well-being.
Ah, yes, the age-old struggle of motivating people to adopt healthier habits. We all know what we should do, but actually doing it.
Right.
That's a whole other story.
So how does the y-axis approach this challenge?
Well, they start by acknowledging that simply lecturing people about the dangers of smoking, overeating, or being sedentary is rarely effective. We need to go deeper than that to understand the underlying motivations and barriers that prevent people from making healthier choices.
So it's about understanding the why behind unhealthy behaviors. Maybe someone overeats because they're stressed, or maybe they avoid exercise because they lack confidence or have had negative experiences in the past.
Precisely. And this requires a more personalized approach. Recognizing that what works for one person might not work for another.
One size fits all does not work when it comes to health and well-being.
It doesn't. You mentioned earlier that they did an experiment where they actually paid students to go to the gym.
Oh, yeah.
What were the long-term results of that?
So they offered students $100 if they went to the gym at least 8 times within a month. And as you might expect, the financial incentive was pretty effective in getting them moving.
It was.
But did they just stop going once the money was gone?
That's what I would think, too. But actually, the results were quite surprising. The students who had been paid to exercise continued going to the gym more often than they had before the experiment.
Really?
Even without the financial incentive.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is.
It's like the money jump-started a new habit, and then once they experienced the positive effects of exercise, the intrinsic motivation took over.
That's one way to look at it. It shows the power of creating those positive feedback loops. Once those students felt the benefits, more energy, better mood, maybe even some newfound confidence. Those positive feelings became their own reward.
It's like they needed that initial push, that extrinsic motivator to discover the intrinsic joy of movement. So what can we learn from this?
I think it suggests that instead of relying solely on scare tactics or guilt trips, we need to find ways to make healthy behaviors more appealing, more rewarding, and more accessible.
So maybe it's about finding activities we genuinely enjoy, whether it's dancing, hiking, swimming, or even just taking a walk in nature. And surrounding ourselves with people who support our healthy habits.
Exactly. And celebrating those small victories along the way, because change takes time. And every step in the right direction is worth celebrating.
It really is a fascinating book, and one of the things I appreciate most about it is that it doesn't offer like these oversimplified solutions or try to fit everything into like these neat little boxes. You know, it acknowledges the complexity of human behavior and the fact that what works in one situation might not work in another.
Exactly. And that's why I think field experiments like the ones Gneezy and list conduct are so valuable. They allow us to test our assumptions in the real world. To see how people actually behave, and then, use that data to create more nuanced and effective interventions.
It's about recognizing that context matters. Individual differences matter. And, we need to be willing to adapt, iterate, and learn from our mistakes along the way.
Absolutely, because ultimately the y-axis is all about learning, growing, and using that knowledge to make the world a better place. And it's a journey we can all embark on.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into this book, what's one small step our listeners can take today to apply the principles of this book to their own lives?
That's a great question. I think one of the simplest yet most powerful things we can do is just start paying attention to our own whys.
You mean taking a pause throughout the day to ask ourselves,
Yeah.
why am I doing this?
Yeah.
What's motivating me? What are my underlying beliefs and assumptions?
Exactly. The more we understand our own motivations,
Right.
the better equipped we are to make conscious choices that align with our values and goals.
It's about taking ownership of our decisions, our actions, and ultimately our lives.
And recognizing that we have the power to create change both within ourselves and in the world around us.
So let's all commit to embracing curiosity, challenging those assumptions, and never stopping asking why.
Because it's in those whys that we'll find the answers, the solutions, and the inspiration to create a world that is both meaningful and joyful.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the why axis, hidden motives, and the undiscovered economics of everyday life.
It's been a pleasure exploring this book with you.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep asking why.